I'd like to share another example of this apparent disappearing away from oneself that is a paradoxical realization of who one really is and who God really is. I once attended an art class by Frederick Frank, who wrote a book called The Zen of Seeing. And in this day of art, we started out the day by standing in a circle. He stood in the middle of the circle and turned towards each one of us and bowed to each of us as we each bowed back to him. We then lined up single file, and he placed in our hand some objects that he had brought in from the surrounding area. And so I came up and held up my hand, and he put a twig in my hand. And then I was given a large tablet of drawing paper and some pencils. And I was instructed, as were all the others, to choose some place to go in the room and sit. And he said, if you see it, draw it. If you don't see it, don't draw it. We were to be in complete silence together all day, just simply drawing twigs and pebbles. And he would come around the room, sitting quietly, whispering to each person little helpful comments. And as he was getting closer and closer to me, I kept wondering whether or not my twig would pass muster. He sat down next to me, looked at my drawing of the twig, and he whispered to me, do you see how in your drawing of the twig does this right here at this point? I said, yes. He said, can you show me on the twig where it does that? I looked. I couldn't see where it did that. He said, do you see on the twig where it goes like this? Could you show me on your drawing where your twig goes like this? I couldn't show him where my twig went like that. He said gently to me, I suggest you start over. Draw what you see. Don't draw what you don't see. Sitting that way with that twig, there was a moment in which the twig vanished as an object upon which I was looking as distinct from and other than myself, and I simultaneously vanished as an observer of the twig. And there was a moment of oneness. The oneness was timeless. I would look up at the clock and be surprised at how much time had passed in this oneness with the twig. He shared a story that once he was giving one of these drawing retreats, and a woman was drawing a flower, and she was sitting there crying, and he asked her what she was crying about, and she said, the flower is dying. It's me. There's this realization of oneness that is the loss of oneself as a separate observer, that is not experienced as the annihilation of self, but a direct realization of one's true nature. This is the extraordinary thing about contemplative experience. Contemplative experience discloses to us our true nature, and in doing so discloses God's nature. Given to us is all that we really are. It's the direct realization of the unitive mystery that is at once all that God is and all that we really are. Here, to vanish, to disappear, is to paradoxically appear in our true nature, standing forth as we truly are. When Merton writes, in sharing with us of his own experience of prayer, if I am still present myself, this I recognize as an obstacle about which I can do nothing unless he himself removes the obstacle. If he wills, he can then make nothingness into a total clarity. He's expressing both in his insights into the nature of contemplation and in the sharing of his own experience of contemplation, this paradoxical melting or vanishing away that is the contemplative realization of a fullness beyond ego. There is another image of this paradoxical but so central dimension of the contemplative experience. That is this experience of ceasing to be an object of one's own speculation as distinct from God that one seeks, and coming to a realization of oneness. Imagine a horizontal line, and the horizontal line symbolizes all finite reality. That is all creation, the whole universe, and everything in it. And now imagine a vertical line that intersects the horizontal line at its center, forming a cross. And the vertical line symbolizes the divine, the infinite, the ineffable, the oceanic presence we call God. And imagine now that as a finite created being, standing on the horizontal line, you are looking at God. That is, you are gazing upon the presence of God as an act of faith. And so you praise God, you worship God, you're grateful to God for God's creation of all things, including you. And sitting in deep meditation, in deep contemplative prayer, you, as it were, are interiorly drawn to the point at which the horizontal and the vertical intersect each other. Being drawn in along the horizontal toward the vertical, there is that point of absolute zero that's prior to the point at which manifested reality is expressed vertically as God or horizontally as the finite. This is ground zero. It is infinite oneness prior to the distinction. From this infinite oneness, this womb of nothingness, flows forth all manifested reality that we, infinitely manifested, call God. We, finitely manifested, call us, the world, all created things. Contemplation is the ever deeper realization of ground zero. It is the ever deeper realization that we are ground zero, and our ground zero as God is ground zero. And flowing out from this is this wondrous unity that recognizes, respects, but does not identify with any distinctions whatsoever. Clearly there is the distinction between who each of us is as unique individuals. Clearly there is the distinction between ourself and God. Clearly there is the distinction between being alive and dead. Clearly. But the more profoundly transformed we are in contemplative oneness, we recognize these distinctions, but we do not identify with any distinctions. We realize directly the oneness that infinitely pervades all distinctions, the oneness that all distinctions manifest perfectly. This is the fulfillment of this contemplative experience, of which Merton speaks of as the way he prays, as the way he surrenders himself over to this oneness in love. I would now like to end with a final visual image of contemplative experience. Imagine a stone falling in water. And imagine that the water in which the stone is falling is bottomless. And because the water in which the stone is falling is bottomless, the stone falls forever, falling, 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 falling forever in this bottomless abyss. And imagine, too, that it is the destiny of this stone to fall forever. And imagine, too, that you are this stone, and that your eternal destiny is to fall forever into the bottomless abyss of God. It is the reality of who you really are right now, listening to these words. It is the reality of who I really am right now as I speak them, the reality of the whole world falling, falling, falling forever into the bottomless abyss of the divine. Contemplation is the direct realization of this endless descent into ever deeper levels of oneness. Imagine, too, that this stone that's falling into this bottomless abyss is falling along the edge of some kind of underwater reef of some sort, from which there are small protrusions, and every now and again the stone hits one of these protrusions and lands upon it. And in landing upon it, it momentarily pauses in the fulfillment of its eternal destiny. But in the undulations of the water, it rolls off and it continues on in its descent. And so too with us. From time to time, we pause in our descent. We catch hold on something, and we momentarily take it as a stopping place, as a place that's enough for us, as a place we can set up camp, like I think I'll settle here, like this will do. But in the undulating movements of reality itself, in the endless, ceaseless flow of things, we roll off and continue on in the ceaseless descent that is our eternal destiny. A contemplative way of life is a way of life that realizes our life to be this descent, to realize that the depths into which we are falling is the fulfillment of our eternal destiny.